Good afternoon to everybody, and good morning to everybody who's joining us from the western side of the world. So thank you for joining us today on this panel discussion. And today's topic is around education in COVID times. And firstly, we would like to thank the National Disaster Management Authority Government of India and the Delhi National Capital Region Government of India, as well as Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi, for curating this 5th World Congress on Disaster Management. Thank you for the platform provided for these pertinent conversations. So as we look at, I think COVID has been a pandemic and a global pandemic like no other. And I think this is the first time the entire world has been gripped by one single pandemic event at the same time. While health and economic activities have been majorly the visible impacted sectors, there have been a silent victims of the pandemic, and education being one of the major one, and the gender and other related aspects being the issues which have been simmering under the carpet. And I think it's pertinent for us to kind of use platforms like this to bring out the issues which are plaguing the ecosystems which are generally beyond health and livelihood as well to the conversation around COVID as a pandemic. So today we are all joined by an august audience as well as an eminent panel set to talk about education in the new normal, particularly for schools, and more in particular resilience around education for the future. So preparedness and response and resilience to handle the journey as we slowly start coming out of the pandemic period and into the new normal, and also looking at this as an opportunity to prepare for future such incidents which may occur, right? So today on the panel, we have various people. I'll quickly introduce them and then move into our conversation. So we have Rebecca Chandler, who's the Chief Impact Officer of World Reader. We have Professor Dr. Akbaruddin Ahmad, former Vice-Chancellor from Darul University in Bangladesh, and currently the Chairman Policy and Research Center, a think tank based in Bangladesh. We have Aekta Chanda, who is Senior Specialist Education from ChildFund India. We have Mihir Bhatt, who's I think about to join us in a little while, the Founder Director for All India Institute of Disaster Management and convener of Duryog Nirvana, South Asia's disaster network for practitioners. We have Angela Taneja from Oxfam India. We also have with us Ram Kishan, who's the Regional Director for Asia for Mercy Corps. So without further ado, what I would like to do is to invite Ray Kancharla, who is the member of SNPC committee, to open the forum for us with some opening words.
Yeah. Thank you, Bhanu, and appreciate everyone who is on this panel today. In fact, I would be very, very brief because I do not want to stand between you and those who are waiting to listen to you. So, education, you are the experts. I would take the position of a listener and a learner, but just to say the World Congress on Disaster Management is the one and only largest platform after the UN system, which brings disaster professionals, researchers, academicians, government duty bearers, and even the last mile persons, including children and youth. So this platform is open to us, and we can reach out to many more. And of course, on the education itself, I have been seeing, as Bhanu said, one and only disaster of this kind, huge global pandemic that we have not been prepared for. And I don't know, we are hearing about what happened 100 years ago, but then each of us as practitioners and people leading the strategic initiatives, I'm sure you would put on the table a lot of reflection for thinking and practice. So World Congress is definitely a space where we can get everybody and start some innovation. In fact, today I was with a group who are about to do education and emergencies model, a pilot in Delhi. I was looking for it for a long time, but now it is happening, EIE. And I think many of you are familiar, and two of the young ladies who will share that experience also will join us soon. So without much ado, Bhanu, I would like to hand over to you and say a big word of welcome to everyone. And I'm going to learn from this like everyone else. And I would not be, self-complacent, and we would like to learn from each other. Thank you. Over to you, Bhanu.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you for these opening comments. So as we look at education in emergencies, in particular in response to the COVID pandemic and the school closures, which I think some countries in this region are still out to get. I think, for example, in India, we are in the 20th month of school closure, particularly the primary schools are not working for the last 20 years, so 20 months. Now that creates not only a present loss of what is being lost in terms of learning outcomes, but it actually creates a lifelong loss for a lot of children, particularly in the under-resourced communities. So I think the focus today is broadly around holistic education, but I think the primary education sector and the K-12 education sector is actually the more deeply impacted space in the pandemic. So I would request Rebecca to take the mic for the next 7 minutes to make her opening remarks.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ray, Bhanu, the entities of the Government of India for hosting us and to be on this panel with some esteemed colleagues. It's a pleasure to join you all today. And so critical, as Bhanu and Ray have expressed, as we consider our future and recognizing that disaster management is so critical, as well as the need to engage in forward thinking and innovation around education and emergencies. 1 second here. So I would like to share a little bit about World Reader. I am, as Bhanu said, the Chief Impact Officer, and how we have looked at responding effectively at this time, building off our last 12 years of experience within digital reading. One thing that is really important, and I think we all believe as critical to a successful nation, to global citizens, is that education and reading, particularly reading, is foundational to that. So our vision really is that readers build a better world. And where do we begin? We begin really at the youngest age, when we look at early childhood development up through upper primary into adolescence. We know that this, to improve learning outcomes, establish better gender equity for lifelong learning. Over the last 12 years, we have worked globally. We've reached 19 million readers as a digital organization and over 79 countries. We have offices in 5 different regions, and we have continued to expand primarily through partners, because we recognize that if we can accelerate the impact of other organizations, be it those on the call today, a ChildFund, a Plan, a Save the Children, other local entities, we can actually have greater impact together. And not only is that part of the SDGs, but that's part of our own mission, at the heart of our mission and operations. We've developed a very simple framework to articulate how we look at delivering our service. And all of you will find this maybe a little bit with humor, the ABCD, but we created it because it's so easy to remember, and it's so foundational to learn our alphabet, regardless of language that we're in. So A, we talk about as a digital organization, we're looking at apps, but it's also not only the apps, but it's really the access. We all have a phone in our pocket. Many of the communities that we work in, even closer to the last mile, have a connected device or have the ability to connect. We're very pleased within our work in India that we're on geo phones that really enable us to reach more and more individuals and households. B is for books and activities. We recognize that in order to be able to develop this foundational habit, this foundational skill of reading, you need content and you need wraparound activities that will reinforce that. So activities that we have designed for our content are related to reading pedagogy, working on vocabulary, comprehension, fluency ideas, as well as social emotional learning. And I'm pleased to hear that we'll have a presentation diving a little bit more deeper into social emotional learning, which is critical when someone is experiencing a pandemic or any other disaster. But finally, we have a play-based activity, which will actually bring these books to life and allow some positive engagement with the content to make reading enjoyable, to bring some life into the experience between a child and their parent, a child and a caregiver, a child and a teacher, and a facilitator around content. C is for continuous engagement, also critical. We know that reading and developing that reading skill takes a lot of motivation. We cross over it by practice. And how do we encourage that practice? How do we make it enjoyable? How do we make it easier for a family, a teacher, a facilitator to further promote that book, those activities, and to make it a positive way? We do that through many ways, both in-app notifications, through tools and tips to facilitators that are pushed out on WhatsApp, and I'll explain a little bit more. We do it through radio in other countries, through social media, through other influencers that can actually speak into communities and into schools and preschools and daycare centers. But finally, D is data. So important that with technology we can measure how much is being read, who's reading, how frequently are they reading, what time of day are they reading, what's the most valuable moment to connect with those caregivers, parents, teachers, etc. And how does that inform and re-inform and allow us to iterate upon our work as we go forward. So for us, ABCD really helps create the framework on how we move forward. Let me share a few examples of how we're doing this. When we all came and recognized the world was going into lockdown, we launched a new application called BookSmart. And within the first year, we had reached over 1 million readers. This was across the globe, reaching in languages of Arabic and Hindi, English, Spanish, and it really became a tool in which parents were suddenly cut off from the education institution. The schools were looking for opportunities to engage their families, that we could reach them right in their home with the phone in their pocket, and at no cost. Really an opportunity to bring reading materials into the home, supplemented with activities to engage a more positive reading experience. I want to give an example of what we've done here in India, and I'm going to just put it through. And I think this is so valuable. Not only did we, put out our BookSmart app as the A, we have the content for B, but the continuous engagement, the C, is becoming more and more critical as we look at how families are really we're asking more and more of families in the education process. And we used WhatsApp. We all have WhatsApp on our phone. It's critical to our lifeline of communication. And how have we done that? We've really looked at how do we take a communication and engagement message and ensure the timing of it. So we talk with our partners, we talk with families to understand what's the best time to remind you to engage with your child in reading. And so here's one example that we have done where we looked at Friday. It was critical that at 11 a.m., because families suddenly had the opportunity before the weekend to be reminded that there was a book coming to them, there were activities they could engage in a positive moment with their children. Monday and Wednesday were also reminders, and along each opportunity we reinforced the book to them, we gave them an activity to engage with their children. And for those from a pedagogical standpoint, we know that reading the same story multiple times it reinforces the vocabulary, it reinforces the intonation, the storytelling, the fluency patterns that are needed for children to hear with this type of content. And so WhatsApp became a very powerful tool for us to reach families simply with the link of a book that brought them right into our app to try and make it seamless in how they do that. You can see on the right how we distributed. We said we're very partner first. So we worked with the local organization. They in turn passed it down to their schools. The school teachers reached out to their families. And so we did a cascade model, very similar to what we know has been done, whether it's training of teachers or master trainers, other mechanisms in which we've used cascade. But what it gave is a very seamless engagement for schools into households at that time. Let me show you briefly how we, some of our tiles that we sent through on WhatsApp. You can see them in English and Hindi, but also you can hear that we included an audio clip to reinforce the book.
कहानी कीप चिल्ड्रन रीडिंग प्रोग्राम का हिस्सा है। बुक स्मार्ट ऐप से आज हम चूहे को मिली पेंसिल नाम की कहानी पढ़ेंगे। इस कहानी का लेखन और चित्रण वी सुतेयेव द्वारा किया गया है। यह कहानी एक लव्य द्वारा प्रकाशित है। इस कहानी में
In Hindi, in English very similarly.
Hello everyone. Are we ready for story time with Booksmart? Second, the ambience for reading is as important as the process of reading. So, find a quiet corner in your house and sit together with your child. Make story time a daily routine. This helps your child develop a reading habit. Choose a time of the day when your child seems...
These are just illustrations of different types of engagement tools, ways to bring these stories to life, to make it easier for a family to engage in a positive reading experience and to keep them motivated. We know motivation, as I said earlier, is critical. We need that time on task in order to see the reading outcomes that we desire. Finally, as I close, I want to show some wonderful pictures, because as we sent these messages through WhatsApp, as we provided activities for parents to engage with their children, the children responded, right? Nothing more exciting than to be engaged and to be celebrated for your own creativity and work. So you can see pictures here of children having drawn elephants or just stories. And the other interesting thing that you can see here on the bottom left of your screen, I believe, or bottom right, you'll see where it says good or there's a date, where teachers also had the opportunity to give back and to share their feedback to their children on what to these students on what they were doing. Very, very motivational to celebrate the children's voice, to have them engage and take a book, have an activity with it, and to then share their own creativity around that book. So where does World Reader continue to engage? We really believe that the child and the family is so critical to the success at an early age, and we recognize that there are additional influencers as the child grows. You have the influencers of schools, you have the influencers of daycares, and together that ecosystem, as we can strengthen the ecosystem with digital reading integration, as it becomes much more from school to home and home to school engagement, and as parents build their confidence and that early habit of reading with their children, we're going to see improvements both within the education system as well as for their lifelong learning. We recently coined a phrase, just really thinking, how do we nurture these young readers, right? And it really takes an ecosystem to nurture them effectively. And so I'm really pleased, I'll stop here, but to say digital reading and reading resources and the activities and that whole program that comes around that can be supportive at home is critical at any moment, whether someone is in an IDP camp, whether they're in a refugee camp, whether they're in their own home because of a pandemic. How much more critical is it that we provide them a holistic reading program right available on their phone for their family and community? So thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you for talking to us on a specific example of how World Leader responded to this crisis and actually helped a lot of NGOs, education NGOs, schools and homes in being able to continue their education process for their younger children at homes in India and other parts of the world. I would now, request Dr. Akbaruddin Ahmad to come over and, in the next 7 minutes, he would be giving a small overview of a study and a research which has been conducted around high-end schools versus schools which lack facilities in Bangladesh. Dr. Akbaruddin, floor is over to you for the next 7 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much. I would like to first thank Brother Ray and Dr. Ananda Babu and his whole team, Dr. Chakrabarti, for inviting me. We have been in connection for the last 8-9 years with WCDM. It's been a pretty long partnership, and unfortunately, with the pandemic and everything, traveling has become highly restricted. I will try and finish my thing within 7-8 minutes. These are very difficult times that we are passing through, and each country has very specific problems of its own. I'll try to highlight some of the problems that we are facing in Bangladesh. Okay. What we had done was, we have one primary school, one girls' high school, and a boys' high school, and a girls' degree college, which is under our control. We are the sponsors. This is in a place called Dhanbari and Tangail. And, there's a committee which manages these. And so we happen to give them instructions and guidance. Just before the pandemic, we'd gone there, we found that, the students, particularly the girl students, there was a pressure from the parent side that there's an age limit, that girls cannot get married before the age of 18. But since these places are towns, okay, it used to be villages, now it is a municipality and a town and a sub-district. And but then there were pressures from the parents to get these girls married. And we took some experts, school psychologists from the Dhaka University, experts from PRC, they were there, and we went to visit this place, stayed there for 3 nights. And then we concluded the findings were extremely important. Number one, the students, particularly students of the upper classes like class 9, 10, and then in the colleges, 11, 12, there was a tendency, they were highly depressed, tendency went to the extent of suicidal tendencies. Now, these are very dangerous things. What we decided that we are going to follow up, we called in the parents, we spoke to them separately, the teachers, the principals, and the students, all separately. And we spent there about 3 days and nights. Experts were there. And we wanted to convey to these people that they basically needed some guidance. Then you see, this pandemic thing came in and everything stopped. We have just opened all the schools and colleges, universities, say about a month back. And we are now maintaining all those health protocols so that there are no further complications. By and large, Bangladesh has done pretty well in containing this spread of COVID-19. And but what we have found, the last 1.5 years, these students have lost a lot say practically 0.9, little less than a year's and time. It will take them some time to recover. And here the students, the guardians and the teachers will have to come in and help. Now my study concentrated on schools in the metropolitan areas and the schools in the rural areas. Now the metropolitan cities, there are some high-class schools which is attended by well-to-do families' children, well-to-do. And teachers are also very highly paid, etc. Even during the pandemic, they were all fully paid, and the students were studies. They were there on the laptop, and they were receiving lessons, and they were continuously 5 days a week. They were there for 4-5 hours every day. Now the problem arose with the schools in the rural areas. You see, number one, the infrastructural facilities over there is not as good as those available in the towns and cities. And like, for example, even though we have the internet facilities available in the remote villages, but then the people over there, they do not have the means to buy the laptop and other facilities, so that the schools could beam out the lessons and could benefit the students in those areas concerned. So this is a very big difference that we observed within the metropolitan cities and the rural areas. Now, in order to overcome these, we have been advising the teachers and the parents that they have to take extra care so that the time lost can be covered in the shortest possible time. There has been a loss in GDP, which would be in excess of $10 billion, $10 billion in the next, if we calculate for the next 10 years. And that is a massive amount of money, $114 billion. That's the loss of the GDP at net present value. Now, there's some leverage that we are expecting from the government, NGOs, international NGOs, local NGOs, and the civil society. So they have come in and they're trying to help in a big way. Now, what the government has done for the rural area schools, what they've done is they're trying to beam out certain lessons through the television, which is beamed throughout Bangladesh into rural areas as well. But that is very limited, and there is some benefit, but then it doesn't go all out. It doesn't help the boys and girls over there. Now the other thing is, our teachers, many of them are very senior teachers, and but then they lack the skills, IT skills. So when you tell them to take lessons and using the laptop and other facilities, they face real problems. So we have to give them some support staff so that they can handle the IT aspect. But of course, not all the schools in the metropolitan cities, but the major schools, their students, they did quite well, even during the pandemic. But what was most alarming was the students in the rural areas, where majority of the students, they live in the rural areas. So they were very badly affected through the pandemic. Now you see, we have recently started the vaccination drive from 12 years and above in the schools also, after this has been opened. And strict care is being maintained with the children. They're entering the schools, washing of hands, sanitization, etc. And sanitization of the premises, chairs, table, etc. All these things are being done. And that is helping us to control. You see, as I mentioned to you, the situation faced by these students, particularly in the rural areas as well as in the urban areas, you see, possibility of going out for games, sports and all that is completely stopped now because of the pandemic. They can't go out. Okay. They are restricted to their homes. Now, after opening of the schools, that is also in a very restricted manner. They cannot go out and play. There are some rules and regulations which these people have to follow. So loss of time that these students have faced, hopefully the teachers and the parents will help the students to recover. And the school psychology thing that we've conducted, the survey, and we call it the Dhanbari model. This we are going again for the second and the third round, and we expect some results to come out, and which we will compile and try to circulate with the WCDM members, etc., etc. Thank you very much. If there are any questions at some point in time, I'll be pleased to answer. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Akbaruddin. We would look forward to the study report as it comes forward, and it's important to kind of understand the scenarios from schools which are well furnished and schools which otherwise are underfurnished, and see the yeah. I would now call on Aekta Chanda to talk to us about a very interesting study they have conducted. ChildFund India has conducted in collaborations with Council of Social Development, particularly around social emotional learning. Aekta, over to you, please.
Yeah, a very good evening to all. And I'm sorry, I'm in Bangalore right now, and I think it's raining outside. So might be some issue. My video is not coming, but I will share my screen. I have a presentation to share. So
please go ahead. Please go ahead, Aekta.
Is it visible?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to talk about our experience. We did a study and then we did a follow-up survey to understand the same about importance of social and emotional learning in the continuity of education, especially in terms of new normal. So before I go there, I would like to show these happy faces to all of us. These eager children all over the world, in India too, are eagerly waiting to go to schools and learn, meet their friends. But how we adults make sure that the learning that happens for them, that awaits for them, is something that they enjoy, and that is something which will help them and want them to continue their learning, is something I will be talking about today. So basically, I'll be first very briefly talk about social and emotional learning and its background, the link between SEL and learning, particularly in the new normal context, and then I will come to our SEL interventions, because all this will be needed. I'll go very briefly with all that, but this will be needed to understand the context of our study and the findings that I'll be sharing, and then I'll be sharing the recommendations and way ahead. So, what do we mean when we say social and emotional learning? So there are many definitions, there are many frameworks. The UNESCO MGIP defines it as the learning that equips all learners to identify and navigate emotions, practice mindful engagement, and exhibit pro-social behavior for human flourishing towards peaceful and sustainable planet. So what is important to know, and there are many other definitions, I'm not going to get into that, but the important thing here to know is this whole set talks about learning competencies that help individual to be aware of self, others, including the emotions, perspectives of self and others, so that they are able to cope, they are able to develop resilience, and are able to exhibit pro-social behaviors. Then there are enough research and studies now available which say that these competencies are intrinsic to human beings, and babies are born with empathy, compassion, and so on. However, the right environment is needed to unfold this. So like literacy and numeracy can be learned, these can also be learned, and these need right kind of environment for learning. These need to be part of day-to-day learning, teaching, learning processes, as well as can be simultaneously, and as well as special modules can also be done. And again, parents and teachers play a very critical role in this. I'm sharing all this because this forms the base for what we did and what we sought out to find, and then how our recommendations and findings are informed. So, connection with learning, especially in new normal situations. So, I would urge everybody to think about when you are more open to learning. Even we as adults, aren't we more open to learning when we are not scared, we are more confident, and we feel have a good self-esteem? So same as the truth for the children. And in our experience, we have realized that even before COVID, children would drop out of school, especially because they belong from a certain community. Their community was not respected. They were not respected. There were indirect comments or sometimes subtle remarks which would mean to say that they cannot learn. So these all have impact on children's capacity to learn and children's interest to learn. And I think I heard Rebecca also saying that it is very important for a learner to be motivated to continue to learn. So it is very important. So that is why one part is this, where it has a direct connection. The second part is resilience. And that is where it connects in especially new normal situations. So what is the investment we are making in our children to help them develop the resilience, the skills and competencies necessary to cope? And I think Professor Akbar also said that, I mean, the way even in India now, if you see the National Crime Record Bureau data, even prior to COVID, there was one suicide every hour a student was committing. And then during COVID times, we saw when children were not able to access online learning methods and all, they were so disappointed. We heard stories of children committing suicides. So this is, on one hand, we definitely need to address the situation of digital divide and make sure that every child has an equal access to learning. But on the other hand, we also need to help our children develop the skills. All of our children need to develop the resilience, especially in situations where in situations of emergency or in situations where they face adversity. So with all that, how do we deal with social and emotional learning component in ChildFund? So for us, it is a holistic thing. It is not just one thing you do and you can get over with it. So for us, it includes parent education component. It includes sensitizing teachers. It includes a kit containing board and card games, specially designed for social and emotional learning, activity books, and parental guidance material and other such stuff. So in this picture, you are seeing these children, they are playing in a neighborhood learning session, which we started immediately after when the lockdown was lifted, but the schools had not yet opened. We started small neighborhood sessions, learning sessions. And in these sessions, the children would engage in these kind of games, which were board games. And children would, through these games, children would talk about how they are feeling, what they are experiencing, how they can support each other. So these are the specially designed set of board games that children are using. Then during the COVID times, we were doing intergenerational coping and learning intervention. And like I told you, when the things started opening up, but the schools were still closed, we were doing neighborhood support classes. So when we were doing the IGCL, the intergenerational coping and learning material, we were making sure that along with stationery, craft material, toys and games and the SEL kit I spoke about, we were also able to give printed worksheets and activity books to children who on SEL specifically. So we designed a specific booklet which helped children draw or write or speak about their experiences during the COVID times, because they were seeing a lot of things happening around them. And when I come to the study and the results of the study, you will see how it was generating emotions in them and how it was negatively impacting them. So to deal with that negative impact, we had this kind of material. We would share daily and weekly plans. These daily and weekly plans and would contain instructions for the parents to how to engage. So in terms of literacy, numeracy, but also social and emotional learning activities. And then things like we would include narrate a story to your child or play this game with your child. So because it was already part of our programming pre-COVID, in our intervention areas, parents were easily able to do it. And so these kind of things were included. Then we would do home visits. We would do regular calls to check up. Then we also provided online material, and then videos and on SD cards were also provided. So you can see, I mean, and library, I mean, we were constantly also providing books from our library and encouraging parents to read those books with their children and discuss emotions during, while reading these books with children. So you see a picture of a cycle library where our facilitator is carrying books on a cycle from door to door, and children are choosing from those books, and these books would then be sanitized definitely before going to the next house. And then you see a mother and her two children sitting and reading. The younger one is just flipping pages, but that is also important as a pre-reading exercise and pre-literacy thing. So now I'm coming to the study. So the study was done in November 2020. We realized that we need to understand what parents, children, and other stakeholders are feeling. What are their perceptions? What are their fears? And what are their expectations with regard to reopening of the schools? So the study was done in these 10 highlighted states, and 2 districts from each state and 2 blocks from each districts were covered. And we covered both intervention as well as non-intervention areas because there were certain general things we wanted to know. Then the sample size for this study was 1,725 children. 1,085 children were from intervention area and 640 were from non-intervention area. Then 1,605 parents were covered. Again, the distribution is given in terms of intervention and non-intervention area. And a total of 127 teachers were interviewed under this study. So certain part of my analysis is focusing on in-depth analysis for these 6 states. The study was done in 10 states, but what I am presenting is data that I have culled out for these 6 states. So if you see the challenges faced due to school closure, major challenges faced by parents were lack of digital devices, internet and power cut related problems, lack of interaction and discussion. So you see almost 50% parents felt that lack of interaction and discussions was also a challenge that they were facing due to school closure. Lack of safety and space at home was also something which parents were saying, and then irregular midday meal. In terms of children, 81% of the children said that learning is easier in schools and in the classroom. And when the reasons they gave for this, they discussed things like they missed interacting with their friends, they missed interacting with their teachers, and it is difficult to learn in this way. A lack of digital devices also came up as a big reason. Internet and power cut related problems also came up as a reason. And involvement in domestic chores that increased, especially for girls, that was a challenge that they were facing. And again, midday meal was also a challenge that many children said, 9.2% children said that they were facing. We also did a sentiment analysis for children. And here are the results. You can see that 73.91%, a huge chunk of children studied, that they said that they were sad. They were feeling sad. And 54% of them were the girls. Why they felt sad? They felt sad because they were, and it was, I mean, it was true for both intervention and non-intervention area, with minor variance in the degrees, because despite of the material and everything, one thing is the human touch, one thing is the chance to meet your friends, to see them every day, to interact with them. That is, so you can see the missing classroom enjoyment is the biggest thing that children were saying. Missing friends, almost 84%, both intervention and non-intervention areas. Children said that they were missing their friends and that's why they were feeling sad. Now, what is more concerning is the children with anxiety, because this is the group which would need more support. And the reasons for anxiety, you can see, I mean, reasons like I'm not able to do my work, my homework. And many children told us when we were talking to them during the study, they said that now that we can't learn, we won't be able to go back to school ever. We don't know anything. How will we learn? So this feeling of being incompetent, of not being able to cope once the schools reopen, is something that is really worrying. Then behavior changes in children. We asked the parents whether they observed any behavior changes during this time, and 56% of the parents said that they did observe some changes, out of which they felt the biggest change in the behavior was children were getting angry very soon. They became disobedient. They were restless. They started telling lies. This also came, but I think biggest thing came was that children was getting irritated and angry. We asked children also what they perceive, whether they perceived any change in their own behaviors. And children also said that they felt more irritated than before. They fought more with the siblings and parents than before. And when we asked, what do you do to overcome these negative feelings, most of the things that they said, the majority included doing artwork and other creative work and spending quality time with the family. So, I mean, if you see, there were like around 8 to 10% differences in the intervention and non-intervention area, but that is also a significant difference in terms of, how children were feeling, because more than 10% difference between intervention and non-intervention areas came when we asked them that will you continue their studies, and are you spending more relaxed time in terms of more productive ways during temporary school closures? Then in terms of emotional and behavioral changes also, there was around 8 to 10% of the difference in children from intervention areas and non-intervention areas. Then more than 6% difference between intervention and non-intervention areas in terms of children's perceptions of joining back school once it reopens. When we spoke to parents, also gave very interesting things to say. I have culled out some 3 quotations or stories from what parents said. Then a father told us, a father from Bastar said that this is this intervention is helping me communicate with my child, and this I would say many fathers. I've just picked up one as a prototype, but we were talking to our parents in terms of our qualitative data. A lot of these stories from fathers came where they said that this was the first time we felt connected with our children because we were spending time with our children in a very constructive way. So like this father say, I now understood that parents also need to spend quality time with their children, as this helps in developing creativity in children I'm also able to see that when parents engage informally with children in activities like narrating stories, playing with them, and so on, children become fearless in experiencing. Being a father, I used to spend most of my time out. My interactions with my children were negligible. But after becoming part of this program, when I was forced to stay at home for the first time, I connected with my child. Likewise, a mother also said that from this program, she felt that inclusion of local games was something she really enjoyed. At one point in our weekly plans, parents started telling us that we don't need suggestions from you anymore. We have now remembered the games we used to play as kids, and we are playing these with our children, and we are enjoying them a lot. And the last one is from a grandparent, because we also observed and we also have a lot of testimonies and statements from grandparents where they said that they felt more connected with their grandchildren as part of this intervention. So with all this, what we have learned and we want to share is, first thing, social and emotional learning has to play a very critical part of interventions and in terms of curriculum and every plan when the schools reopen. Actually, a lot of discussions and interactions I have been having, and I'm hearing a lot also about learning gaps and the learning losses. The fear is if we pressurize children, and remember the example I shared about about children talking about their incompetency to continue because they've forgotten everything. This might create pressure on them, and they might be pushed out of the education system. So the social and emotional learning has to play a critical role. Then parents can do and play a very important role even if they are not literate. So strong parental engagement programs are needed. Then sensitization of teachers on SEL is needed. And in new normal, undue pressure should not be given on learning outcomes only. First, activities and interventions like art activities, sport activities, then specially designed SEL modules should be done with the children, and gradually they should be brought to doing their working on their learning outcomes. And lastly but not least, I feel there is a lot advocacy needed on social and emotional aspects of learning. Thanks.
Thank you, Aekta. Thank you for sharing this study and research report with all of us. I think it carries some very pertinent insights which all of us in this space have to keep in mind as we design the learning loss recovery programs and all of that stuff. And I particularly like the point you said about not pressurizing for learning outcomes, but more focusing on bringing them back to the routines of learning activities first, and then go after learning outcomes. This brings us to a good point to actually transition the discussion to Mr. Mihir Bhatt, who's here with us from the All India Institute of Disaster Mitigation, to talk about safety and safer future for the children in the world as we exit the pandemic and post that. Mr. Mihir, over to you. I would request you to kind of keep your remarks to 6 minutes so that the other panelists would also have the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhanubhai, and thank you, Ray, for inviting me. And I'm very glad to be part of this panel. It's my honor, and my apologies for missing part of it. I have 4 points to make in 6 minutes, and then we can discuss. One is about the awareness. Second is about the finance and investment related to education in the pandemic. Then one is about the governance of performance, and then about the preparedness. So about awareness, first thing I'd like to make, and I was lucky enough to have some discussion with Rambai, and the awareness about the loss and damage caused to children's education in last year and a half. Lockdown and after lockdown and second wave, there is no quantification of that is being done. And not only that quantification is enormous in terms of rupees in a short term, but also in the long term in terms of large number of future of Indian citizens, how it is affected, we really don't know. So that's something I would very much like to put on the agenda for all of us to think about, and also as a follow-up, that what is the quantum of this loss in terms of children's education, and sadly enough, lower we go in terms of income, or further we go in terms of inclusion of citizens, the damage is even larger and even more irrevocable. So imagine a whole generation coming up with this damage and loss, and we haven't adequately even measured that. Leave aside, do something about it. So that's the first point about the awareness. I'd like to take that to the second point, and which is the investment, that if we don't know the loss and damage that is caused to education because of the pandemic, especially among the girl child, among the tribals, among the social groups, among the ethnic groups, minorities, religious and others, then how are we going to invest in making up for this loss and damage? And that is something that worries me a lot, not only for India, but if I may say so, for South Asia as well, because the investments need to be targeted. We don't know if they are being targeted. They need to be adequate. And if we don't know the nature of the loss, how are we going to have adequate investment and finance for making up this loss and damage? We also do not know what is invested by whom, in what part of the education, in the larger educational system, schools, curriculum, food, nutrition, textbooks, so on and so forth. So that is something I would again like to underline, that investments that are planned to be done need to be based on some accurate assessment, and that is something which is not done. However, I would like to point out from our own experience that the investments made by the parents and by the community themselves and some social groups around them actually are not accounted for. So the making up of loss and damage is already started by the investments made by the parents for the children and by the community in their families that exist before, and that we haven't accounted for at all. So that's an investment, Dhanubai. The third thing about governance, and that is or more in terms of performance, that how the schools and education system are performing, and there are two sort of sub points to that. Number one, we know that there is hardly any capacity to surge education to take care of the pandemic kind of huge disaster, and that wasn't there before and is not there even now. So what do we do about it? Is there some way by which we can actually anticipate and plan for such surge capacity for any future performance? That's number one. And second part of governance, that is that education-related recovery, as the pandemic is still unfolding, is delegated to education departments. And should that be, or education should be everybody's business, as far as everybody's responsibility. And that is something as far as the governance and performance is concerned. And that's coming out very clearly from our work that we are doing. And the last point, as my 6 minutes finished, is about the preparedness. And I don't think, and I hope I'm wrong, and I'm waiting for somebody to tell me you are wrong, I don't think we are at all prepared, our education system, at all prepared for a third wave, leave aside similar pandemic in future. So what is, and we are all trying, I'm not at all undermining the efforts done by everybody at the district level, state authorities, national authorities, civil society, but still, as a whole, we are not prepared for that. And we are also not prepared for a similar pandemic, may God forbid, that may turn up in some other form to do that. And we don't have to wait for any other future pandemic, because we are already facing, as we face the pandemic, the heat waves, and we've seen the impact of that, and we will face more of them. We will face more of tropical cyclones, and not only in one side of India, but both sides, one after the other or simultaneously, and the sea level rise that we are facing in India, in Bangladesh, in South Asia, in other parts of the country, Asia as well. So that is something again of great concern to me, that we don't have the preparedness and therefore anticipating possible loss and damage that we have. So what I'm going to suggest and request for all of you to consider, that maybe as an outcome to this particular discussion that we have, we set up some way of, I don't know, group or some sort of a mechanism which will look at what are the major top 10 lessons learned from this pandemic as far as education is concerned, education of especially poor and vulnerable children is concerned. So what is it that we really know, and we don't need to do any more research, we just know that has happened, and that should be, that we start integrating in all our disaster programs, humanitarian programs, climate change programs, and conflict programs, irrespective of the local context and local situation as is now, because we can always anticipate a major disaster coming up. With that, I would like to end. With that particular suggestion that is put on table for everybody to consider, I'd like to end. And again, thank very much for the fifth World Conference for Disaster Management, that it has given this platform to start thinking about this, and to, of course, Ray and Nangai for this opportunity to me. And my salam to Akbaruddin Ahmad and everybody else in there.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mihir. Very pertinent points. I think it's important for us to look at the learnings and actually think about the preparedness for the new normal as we go forward. And I think, like you rightly said, there hasn't been a comprehensive effort to kind of understand, collate the learnings, and actually really think about preparedness for anything like this in the future. And I think that is something we should look at how to take forward as a conversation among this group and a wider group of the Congress as well. I would switch to Angela Taneja of Oxfam to share her thoughts with us. Angela, if you could keep it to 6 minutes, it would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, so while I open the screen, fundamentally, we all know the status during the course of the pandemic. Reality is we have had, as far as India is concerned, we have had the third longest school lockdown in the world, if you include full and partial closures. If you, not my figures, it's the UNESCO figures, since they've been tracking this. The reality is that when it comes down to it, there have been most countries have to an extent reopened, as you can make out from the slower map. When only 3 countries, which are Uganda, 2 countries, which are Uganda and Nepal, have had longer school lockdowns. Therefore, things have been substantially could have been. We do have a fairly long catching up, fairly large amount of catching up to do. In terms of what has Oxfam been doing about it, a lot of it has been knowledge and research. We have also done our rapid surveys. We have done qualitative policy analysis and research. We've done advocacy with the NHRC with respect to development of guidelines on child rights during the pandemic, which have relied on our rapid surveys as well. We've engaged with the NCPCR and state governments to advocate for frameworks. We have worked on the ground to have instructions in locations where we work, especially beyond digital, and have worked to identify children at risks and child laborers and track entitlements, because fundamentally for us, it's the responsibility of the state to deliver education. When it comes to the evidence building that we have from our survey, plus the existing analysis, that policy analysis one is done, yes, there has been there has been an emotional and physical impact on children. 64% in rural India have feared that they will drop out without extra support. There has been an emotional toll and a child protection toll of the pandemic. And in fact, at the end of the first wave, our research showed that 40% of teachers felt they feared that as much as a third of their students will drop out when schools reopen. Schools have now reopened. One has a sense of how things are. Yes, instruction moved online, but reality is, as far as government is concerned, and again, these visuals are our rapid survey findings, 80% of parents reported that education was not delivered. And in fact, only a fifth of households in private schools experience some form of structured teaching. So therefore, things have been bad in terms of quality of provisioning of education in both government as well as private schools. Teachers have expressed concerns around this consistently across the entire pandemic because therefore 84% of them were facing challenges in delivering education digitally. 75% were not provided the necessary protective equipment and hazard pay. And in fact, less than 1% of teachers were protected by insurance. What they've called for is low-tech and no-tech modes of delivery, which have not been implemented. And therefore, and in fact, 71% of teachers were asking for basics like textbooks should be delivered to children before schools reopen. There has been the experience of the digital divide. Only yes, things are bad across the board, but only 2.7% of the poorest quintile, poorest 1/5 of the population, only 2.7% of them had a computer, and only 8.9% had access to internet facilities. Majority of marginalized communities, scheduled tribes and scheduled castes, the indigenous people and the former untouchable castes had access to a computer. In this context, we had a move online towards an online instruction. Yes, people say everyone can use the smartphone, but as the figures below show, fundamentally when it comes to access to smartphone ownership, things are bad, but they are particularly bad for marginalized communities in terms of especially Dalits and Adivasis. Unsurprisingly, the more recent survey of Chandler has pointed out that barely 5%, only 4% of scheduled caste and scheduled tribe children were able to study online regularly. Therefore, things are terrible when it comes to the status of education of indigenous learners during the course of the pandemic. It's not just access, it's fundamentally the fact that sharing of devices, maybe across gender lines, girls are less likely to get access to a single limited mobile phone which is shared across multiple family members. Or almost all materials are in at best the state language. Forget about materials and instruction and broadcasts being available in tribal languages. There is untested quality and appropriateness of the programs. And yes, while we appreciate that there is value and there is the shared experiences of parents that they've had with their children during the pandemic, but let's also not forget that individualizes the responsibility for instruction to parents, and it makes for a fairly unequal experience because it places the education of those with new literate parents and those who have never parents who have not been to school at all, puts their education in jeopardy. And at best, educational technology has not really shown, even at peacetime, a significant improvement in learning. We've talked a lot about government schools, But let's also accept that there have been issues with respect to private schools. Objectively, they have not been being able to deliver, as I was showing earlier. It's not like things are perfect. They're only marginally better in terms of being able to deliver. But there have been additional issues with respect to the fact that it has been a time of economic crisis. So therefore, 40% of parents reported that they've had to pay hiked fees during the pandemic. And there's been a fairly high pressure on parents to pay as well at this point in time. So therefore, when it comes to resilience and the resilience of the system and the readiness of the system, it's time to start looking in a more segregated and critical way on the question of public and private provisioning both. A lot of us talk about the time during the previous phases and before closure, but now that schools are beginning to reopen, we are beginning to also get evidence on the status of schools during the pandemic. There's been a churn in the sector. Many have, and that's a rapid survey that we did. There've been a fairly large percentage of shift from private schools to government schools, or private schools which are cheaper. Therefore, there is a need to critically examine the status of the system at this point in time. Unsurprisingly, the result is psychological trauma. It's the disproportionate impact on the most vulnerable. It's the learning loss. 92% children have lost at least one learning language ability during the course of the pandemic. And the World Bank projects that $400 billion have been lost in terms of future earnings to those who have lost almost now 2 years of education. But let's now move to the present. We've also in the middle of doing a rapid survey of the status of schools now at the time when schools have reopened. There's a fair amount of evidence on what has been the status during while lockdown was on. We now know what has been the situation after reopening. Only 36.7% children report that some learning assessments have been done to identify learning levels after reopening in government schools. In fact, in private schools, only barely 14% of parents are saying that the current learning levels of children were assessed after the return to school. Only 34% of children in government schools said that when they returned after a year, there has been some revision of the previous year's work. Private schools, barely 8%. 66.6% children in government schools said that it's difficult for them to follow what is being taught, and which is 38.7% for private schools. While it may be better, it still is objectively bad. 40% almost children are 40% of parents feel that their kids are not able to follow what's being taught. But across the board, children are enjoying being finally able to interact with friends. 52% for government and 47.4% for private schools. What are the teachers concerned about now? Because a system is only as good as its teachers, and in terms of systemic readiness and resilience as well. 79% of teachers, and that's teachers in government school, children say they say that children have forgotten what they had learned earlier. So 73% say that their attention span has reduced. Almost 72.5% say attendance remains irregular. And 47.8% complain that they're now being forced to do double the work because of hybrid mode. Some kids are in school, some kids are, as in physically in school, some are not. Therefore, finding the right balance is means that they have to work to take separate classes for both. and they feel that only 25% of schools are equipped for delivery of hybrid modes of instruction in terms of equipment, facilities, etc. What they want is a restructured curriculum to deal with learning loss and the experience of this disruption of the system, 74.5%. A surprising and rather unfortunate 73.4% are still asking for complete vaccination of teachers and school staff as an essential. 73% are asking for enrollment campaigns to bring those irregular children and those who have dropped out back into school. Therefore, yes, India needs to address the immediate impact of the pandemic, which has been traumatic and for which systemic preparedness of learning from the lessons of these 2 years of disruption has been inadequate. It needs to ensure basic obligations in the education sector, which have been long pending peacetime asks in terms of quality and equity. And in the long run, we need to have a long-term policy on education in emergencies so that we don't have a repetition in future crises. Thank you. It's not rocket science. The government has the capacity to do so. We are a rich country with some of the richest people. And in fact, therefore, it's not that we cannot afford it given the state of additional revenue that has been generated due to the pandemic. Thanks.
Thank you, Angela. Thanks for sharing the assessment. I think the insights and the data is quite telling. We would like to, see how we could create more visibility for all this information you've shared with the wider audience and impact, the strategies of other program designs as well. We are running against the clock here, so I would request Ram Kishan from Mercy Corps to
make his statements in 5 minutes before we move quickly to the respondents. Ram, over to you, sir.
Thanks, Manu. Can you hear me?
Yes.
And I think being the last speaker is always advantageous when you have a less time because much have already been spoken. So I'll start because I'm not the education expert, neither I work on the education sector much. I work on the disaster preparedness and also responding to public health crisis before in Ebola and also in the COVID pandemic, especially at the community level. So one, there's no denial that nobody was prepared for it. So 2 years back, 2019, nobody thought this is going to be this big. It's going to be global. It's going to be affecting everyone, all sectors, and everyone at household and at the work level. So that has been the fact, and I think that has one big factor that everybody has been taken by surprise. But that cannot be the excuse now and in future. So that's the most important thing. So when we look at and work in the disaster preparedness, we always say, what have we learned from the past? What have we learned in terms of building back better or doing it better and best? So that should be the bottom line. And I think Angela did say, made that point that we need to be preparing for future, and that requires resources, intent, and policy interventions. In terms of our preparedness, have we learned anything? I think we are yet to see. One is that whether our response was adequate and timely and was that the most appropriate response for dealing with the pandemic. One, we have seen the tangible losses, and that has been quantified on the economic side. We have seen on the health side, like number of people affected with COVID, but also people who have lost their life. We have also seen the impact across different socioeconomic sections. So that's the background that we are working on. The other thing which is important for us to understand is that this response, or maybe going forward, because we're still not out of it. We are still seeing fifth wave in some countries. We still have a second wave just over, and anticipation of third wave might happen. So at the moment, we are moving with the assumption that things will be better, and therefore things have started opening up gradually. So businesses, now schools are opening up in countries like India, but also many other countries. Will that continue as it is? If there's going to be a third wave, fourth wave, depending on which country you are in, will this go back to again the home remote working and learning environment, and are we really going to be better than before? Are we going to be better in December and January 2022 as compared to 2021? So that's the real question, and I don't think that there's enough been done. One silver bullet which has been seen by many, especially at the policy level, is the digital connect or digitalization may help. We have seen data. Angela's presentation had clearly said it's not going to be a solution. One is it's not only about the penetration of internet at village level or at remote areas. It's also the accessibility, the resources required, and the recurring expenses which are going to be on top of everything else, and the overall economic divide. While we say private and the government school, but we also need to look at different levels of private schools, because all schools are not really well resourced, and there will be a different response when it comes to education, resources, teachers training, payments, and all the other stuff. So how do we look at this as a more comprehensive approach and see this as part of our preparedness at policy level resource allocations? One which is important is there is widespread inequality on the other side, but are we really going to have the same inequality when it comes to the basic education that should be provided for children? And therefore, our resources need to be accordingly available at those kind of remote areas, not looking at the urban, but also the rural sections of it. Something which I've realized, which has worked, at least on the disaster preparedness side, I don't know how much will that be true, but listening to ChildFund presentation, one thing which is clear is that we need to prepare communities, because it's going to be hugely difficult for the scale of crisis that we have faced for an institutional response to it. So how do we look at community-based solutions where it is neighborhood solutions, support group which can work? And there have been examples. I was in Nigeria before, and we had an education program where we actually moved away from the school education, especially in the pandemic period, and had those community volunteers and educators who were working at community level with a smaller group to make sure that this is not overcrowding and working on it. So how do we find out of the box solutions and maybe much more widespread? And there are examples, and I think there are good pilot that can be replicated, and government should be looking for it. The last point, I know that we are running out of time, is that we need to be learning from our mistake, and that's what I would repeat again. And in my personal opinion, we are opening up schools now while we are still not out of pandemic. Why has this not been done before? That's a real question. So are we opening up now because it's all over, and the losses that we have incurred of 1.5 years of closing up schools and loss of it, because everything else was open except schools. So was there a better option to address the education system in a way that we have addressed this in the transport, economic sectors, and all the other aviation sectors? Was there other different options to better address this thing? So I think we need to go back and see whether this was the right way of dealing with the pandemic, just closing the school while the same parents, same children are open, going to markets, going to those functions and all. So is it only the school the spreader, or there are other areas? So I think the comprehensiveness of this was not seen, and therefore the education sector had the least attention and therefore the worst impact. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ram. Thanks for those remarks. And like you said, going last has its own advantages as well. But I think it's important that you called out for learnings from these experiences and how we can, convert that into a preparedness plan at a institutional level and infrastructure level. I think I would request the panelists to kind of hold on for another 10 minutes or 15 minutes. I would open the floor to Aparajita Ray here from Society for All-Round Development for her to quickly respond to the commentary of the panelists and pose 1 or 2 questions for the panelists to respond. I would request the panelists to kind of come on video back, and over to you, Aparajita, if you could ask your questions in a quick 2 minutes.
So thank you so much, everyone. That was a really insightful experiences and thoughts you have all shared. So I had two questions with the two of the panelists. So I'll ask first. I wanted to know, this question is for Aekta, Chanda. You have very brilliantly talked about the social psycho support of the children and how far you have contributed in the field, how far you have contributed with the families and children. But I wanted to know that, see, the urge of going back to school to the children, and you know, the schools now, students are going back now, definitely they require this social psycho support. But what do you think about the mental health of teachers as well? You are talking about to add in the curriculum of psychosocial with the children, but what about the mental health of teachers who have also suffered during this pandemic? There is a backlog, there is a loss also in their era, that when they were talking, where they were working over there, they have faced difficulties, they have faced challenges. So just want to, can you give some insight on that?
I think, Apresta, we can open the question to everybody in the panel. But Aekta, can you go first, and then anybody else in the panelists want to respond? There's a very pertinent point of what about the mental health and emotional health of the teachers as well. Aekta, over to you, please.
Oh, yeah, thank you. And sorry, but my video is still not on. I would say a very brilliant question. And so I would say it is definitely more important to also think about teachers' mental health. There are a lot of researchers now which say that like COVID was contagious, the stress that teachers feel also is contagious. So if teacher is stressed, there is very high chances that the class that she or he is teaching, that the children will also get affected by the stress they are feeling. So definitely in the teacher training programs that we are doing, even that those are happening online, and there is a lot of pressure there as well. So it is important for us to also consider teachers' mental well-being and their own social and emotional well-being. Yeah.
Any other panelists would like to quickly respond to this question? If not, Apresta, go to your next question, please.
I just extend this question, then I'll ask another question to Angela. But before that, I wanted to extend this question to Rebecca and Mihir Bhatt, who was brilliantly gives the insights. That can you please tell us that you have talked about actually you have also included the new education policy of foundation of literacy and numeracy. But I wanted to know that if we talk about the mental health, what is the role of children in this? Because we talk about social psycho, okay, we talk about that students require this support, but what is the role of children also in achieving in the preparedness or recovery of this pandemic impact?
Oh, I can go first, Anuji, in terms of new education policy. And when it came out, while it was coming out, we did a lot of efforts to make sure that both DRR and humanitarian aspects are included into that, but we were not as successful or hardly successful at all. And when the policy came out, we said that at least if the policy is there, maybe the rules which come out for the implementation of the policy can more clearly look at DRR, and we had joined up with NIDN to make possible some discussion to make these rules more disaster sensitive, more humanitarian crisis sensitive, even some of the climate aspect. But somehow that never actually took place. And so the new education policy is obviously very useful in many ways. But as far as disasters are concerned, humanitarian crisis is concerned, it can deliver far more as far as protecting and preparing the children is concerned. So that, and I think some group at some point even now should pick up, and we'll be very happy to join this group to say that what small changes, but which will have a huge impact across the country. So that's something for the new education policy. Thank you, Anuji, for asking the question.
Yeah, I think, Mr. Mihir, that is a very pertinent point. I think this component has been grossly missed in the national education policy, and I completely second your point that it is something which somebody should actively take up.
Yes.
Apresta, over
Yeah.
to you for the third question, please.
Okay, yeah. So I have a last question to Miss Angela, Miss Taneja. You have talked about, your presentation was very nice. Thank you so much for that experiences you have shared, the analysis you have shared. I think that one thing is missing, which I wanted to light upon it, that we talk about the loss of education, we'll talk about the loss of learning outcome, improving learning outcome. We have talked about that. But during this pandemic and after this pandemic, the education of girls is more disrupted. So what do you think? How we are going to address that? Because before that, parents have got motivated and they have started, sending their girls to the schools and everything. But after COVID pandemic, that the domestic violence they are facing, then the inequity they are facing in learning, in achieving the education. So what do you think about that? Can you please give your insight on this?
So yes, it's obvious that girls, I've actually flagged it. I didn't get into too much of details. There's just that much one can do in 6 minutes. But fundamentally, yes, there is, girls are particularly affected. It's girls from the marginalized communities are especially affected. Whether to what extent there would be, to what extent would this loss be mitigated, in a lot of ways depends on the extent to which the government is willing and able to respond to the obvious needs, which are the re-enrollment bridges, the accelerated learning interventions, as well as dealing, counseling and support, psychosocial support to both the children themselves and their parents, to bring us back to the old normal, because it's time to come back to an old normal where kids go to school every day.
Thank you for your response, Angela. I have a question to ask of Dr. Akbaruddin and Rebecca. I mean, as we look at some of the data which Angela and other people have presented, clearly, while digital is a potential solution, there is also the digital divide which is there. And I think, how do you see that panning out as you go forward into the next 2 to 5 years in terms of being prepared for anything like this in the future? So either of you can go first and,
please. Yeah. I'll go ahead first. You see, there are some international NGOs like Teach for Bangladesh, is an American NGO involved in with schools, and then there's a BRAC. It's a very huge institution, BRAC. They've got a massive educational program all over Bangladesh. Apart from that, we have small foundations where, like we have a foundation, we have contributed to a number of schools and educational institutions, etc., building infrastructure, etc., training of teachers, etc. Those things are there. Because if we keep on depending solely on the government, it will be very difficult. We have to promote and obtain help from these international NGOs and local large NGOs, national NGOs, large ones, and also wealthy individuals who may not be in the education sector, but who may be invited to come in as sponsors in the education sector. This is what I feel, which we have been doing, and I think it is being done quite successfully. Because see, people are not getting paid, number one. Schools cannot collect fees from the students, from the parents. Parents have lost their jobs. Situation is quite serious, not only in the cities and towns, but also in the villages. And this digital divide, on this topic, we had a very big conference of a couple of months back. You see, the guys who are living in the metropolitan cities, they are reasonably in a better situation, well-to-do, and they can send their children to very big, important institutions. They have all the equipment that they can use, and the schools can also beam classes through trained teachers, etc. But this digital divide will remain for quite some time. till situation in the rural areas, the villages, it comes up. Now in my country, the internet facilities, 4G, now is gone right through up to the villages, which is massive. But then the buying capacity of the for the equipment by the family members for their wards, that has not improved. So we have to find out some mechanism whereby one family is financed through some bank or some institution, so that the family itself can be benefited. I'm thinking in these terms, like we manage the schools and colleges, and by and large there has been the situation of people have become extremely depressed, the parents and students, and this depression is fast expanding. Now the schools in Bangladesh, colleges in Bangladesh, about a month back, it's all opened up. And that is a good sign. Things will start becoming normal, hopefully. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Over to you, Rebecca.
Yes, I would just say that as we envision the next 5 years, there's no doubt that technology and digital will continue to play a much bigger role, and the divide could even exacerbate, which we don't want to do. I think joining hands with individuals and organizations that are non-digital with a digital component, infusing it in over the time will be critical, but we have to make that deliberate. We do know that there are big infrastructure commitments being made globally to reach that last mile and to reach villages and ensure connectivity. But I think as we consider the creativity and the innovation that's needed to use multiple platforms to bridge that divide will become even more apparent.
Thank you, Rebecca. I would request all the panelists to just come back onto the camera for a group picture which the backend team would take, but I would also in parallel ask Pradeep to give his summarization remarks.
Yeah, thanks, Manu, and thanks all the panelists. I think remarkable discussion. In a minute, I'll just summarize the key points here. I think we all agreed that this is one of the largest learning losses in the human history, and many presentations covered that. Not only the loss of learning, but also the loss on the country, on the nation, on the entire GDP, on various other aspects of our life. This has impacted. Some good aspects were also there, like in terms of family bonding, but those were like very little ones. But the other aspects were, the negative aspects of this pandemic were huge. We also, learned during the presentations how the entire NGO community and other organizations responded to that. So understanding the situation through various studies, understanding the impact, especially on children. So all those were there, and also the enormous efforts to respond to the need and challenges. So that were also shared. So we learned what is happening, what is the impact. So simultaneously the efforts were done. The insights were also shared in terms of geographical inequalities, how the pandemic affected the rural areas, urban areas, SC/STs, girls. So those gender lenses were also applied. And I think through that, it was very clear that the disaster doesn't impact everybody equally. Disaster impacts you as per your ability, as per your resilience. So, and that's why people who had less resilience, who were in a already challenging situation, they were affected more. So I think those were very, very unique learnings. The importance of socio-emotional aspect was highlighted a lot, the role of technology, the digital divide, how that is also impacting the communities, challenges of online education, all those I think were key learnings. Going forward, if I see what is the key recommendations or the key summary in terms of going forward, as Meher Bhai also said, awareness and preparedness, key for us. Role of technology, how do we see that? Are we prepared for a third or a fourth wave or a similar pandemic if that happens? What is our comprehensive mechanism and preparedness? What is our comprehensive effort to address a future, such kind of a future pandemic? a holistic program is needed. Whatever you do, whether you do education, health, but a holistic approach is required. And last two are, everybody agreed on the role of parents now. So whether it is education or other, or protection or other things, role of parents are critical. In one voice, we all have to demand a long-term policy for education in emergencies. I think that's the key demand. And also the role of technology towards the end to ensure the digital divide. So I think these were the critical thing. I'll just end by this mantra, which I also learned from the disaster champions. Children can't wait. So CCW is our, they have waited enough for almost 2 years. Let them not wait anymore, and let us all think for them. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pradeep. I think that's a great slogan to actually call this webinar for a wrap. Thank you, all the panelists. I would also like to thank the National Disaster Management Authority, Government of India, the National Capital Region Government of Delhi, and Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi, for convening this webinar and creating this platform for this World Congress on Disaster Management. Thanks, everyone. Over to you, back in team.
Thank you.